Hello and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Layo Adigoke. On the program this week, aid agency Red Cross accuses the world of turning its back on Afghanistan as its people face severe malnutrition, plus spike in children suffering from breathing problems from India's heavy air pollution. The Red Cross says that economic sanctions against Afghanistan are depriving millions across the crisis-stricken country of the basics they need to survive. The country is facing what aid agencies have described as one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters since the Taliban takeover in mid-August. Since the Taliban regained power, the U.S. and its allies have imposed sanctions on the Central Asian country and deprived Afghans of any aid and assistance on the pretext of pressuring the Taliban to abide by human rights laws.
Over 100 days since the Taliban takeover, a senior Red Cross official has voiced anger at the continuation of sanctions and freezes in international aid to Afghanistan, preventing basic services from being delivered to the population. ICRC Director of Operations Dominic Stillhart warns that sanctions and donor freezes are cutting off basic services in Afghanistan, has called on donors to find creative ways to prevent a massive humanitarian crisis.
The needs are far too big for humanitarian aid to do the trick in this country here. Humanitarian aid was actually never meant to substitute a dysfunctional system, let alone replace collapsing economy. And as winter sets in, the policies that were meant to avoid supporting those that are in power are now instead freezing out millions of Afghans of the very basic needs they require to survive. The number of children that are suffering from severe malnutrition, pneumonia, dehydration has doubled since the month of August. And we saw in this hospital there is 3 children in every single bed in the pediatric ward. And I can tell you it is deeply upsetting to look into the eyes of hungry children with their parents desperate sitting next to their children in these beds of the pediatric ward. It is really extremely clear that food insecurity is growing very, very rapidly, and more people will have huge difficulties to put enough food in the plates of their family. So we will see a situation that will deteriorate further and further, and that is why it is so important to inject liquidity into this economy, starting paying salaries for people that are working in the health sector, in the education sector.
Earlier this month, the United Nations warned that more than half of Afghanistan's estimated 40 million population is likely to go hungry this winter unless more funds are forthcoming from donors. According to UNICEF, Afghanistan was already one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a child. Over the past year, the situation has become even more desperate as conflict, drought and COVID-19 have collided to create a humanitarian emergency. An estimated 3.2 million children under the age of 5 are expected to suffer from acute malnutrition by the end of 2021. The return to power of the Islamist Taliban after the withdrawal of US-led foreign troops has plunged the country into an economic crisis and increased Afghan humanitarian needs to unprecedented levels. The international community has refused to grant diplomatic recognition to the Taliban government, mainly over human rights concerns, especially those of women and girls under the Islamist movement's rule. Taliban officials have said they do not intend for a repeat of the harsh fundamentalist rule of the previous government, which was toppled following the September 11, 2001 attacks, but they have struggled to convince the outside world that they've really changed. They continue to exclude representatives of other sectors of society and curtail the rights of women and girls, which includes stopping them from going to school and work.
In Lebanon, another country in crisis, the United Nations says severe economic crisis has left some children hungry and without good medical care and forced others to drop out of school to help their families. Lebanon is grappling with its worst ever financial crisis, with nearly 80% of the population estimated to be living below the poverty line.
Children have been hit hard by Lebanon's deep economic crisis, exacerbated by the global coronavirus pandemic, which has left about 8 in 10 people poor and threatens the education of some 700,000 children, including 260,000 Lebanese. According to a report by the UN's Children's Fund, the multifaceted crisis, rooted in decades of corruption and mismanagement, has led to a breakdown in the provision of basic services such as electricity and water. Nearly half of households had insufficient drinking water by October 2021.
Close to half the households reported having insufficient water. In 35% of the cases, the reason is because of the increased cost. 30.6% of families have been forced to cut expenses on education. This is another increase in comparison to 26.3% 6 months ago. This is a children's crisis. Again, you hear all this headline news talking about economic crisis, financial crisis, and the political crisis. But let us face it, it is a crisis of children which we cannot afford. Urgent action is needed. The needs are massive, and the cost of inaction is too high. Unless we act now, every child's future in Lebanon is at stake.
The report notes that less than 3 in 10 families had received social assistance, leading them to desperate measures.
The proportion of surveyed families who sent children to work rose from 8% to almost 12%. This is very alarming. 1 child out of 8 is working. And the percentage of Lebanese children who required primary health care and did not receive it rose from 18% to 35%, meaning it almost doubled in 6 months period.
Prime Minister Najib Mikati's government has been slow to implement social safety programs, including a $246 million World Bank-funded one adopted by Parliament in March and a $556 million ration card scheme backed by the legislature in June. Lebanese father of 5, Habib Marie, says he can hardly afford sending his children to school. The 38-year-old who lives in Tripoli works at a coffee shop and only earns 2 million Lebanese liras per month, an amount he says not sufficient for his family's daily needs.
There are hospitals available, but we cannot afford them. It is impossible. After lifting subsidies on medicine, definitely we can't. I used to give my child a spoon of medicine. Now, it's as if I am giving him a spoon of death. I feel like I am killing him slowly. Yesterday, it took me 3 to 4 hours looking for someone to fill an inhaler for me. This is deprivation. That is not normal at all. Something wrong is happening. This inflation.
The United Nations says nearly 3/4 of the formerly middle-income nations' population now suffer from poverty. Banks impose informal controls on withdrawals, and the currency lost more than 90% of its value since 2019 in what the World Bank has labeled a deliberate depression and one of the worst financial crashes in the world since 1850. Western nations have offered aid in return for reforms, but Lebanon was without a permanent government for 13 months in the wake of the deadly August 2020 Beirut blast.
More people have fallen ill due to air pollution in India's capital, New Delhi, in the past 2 weeks. The air pollution in the city has become increasingly serious, with more children in hospital with breathing problems and pediatricians warning that the toxic smog threatens children's medium and long-term physical and cognitive growth.
India has temporarily shut 5 coal-fired power plants to try to combat the chronic winter smog that has enveloped New Delhi. It's threatening the lives of residents. Pediatricians at this hospital in one of the world's most polluted capitals are seeing an alarming increase in children with allergies, wheezing, respiratory and breathing issues, and say the yearly smog poses danger to their medium and long-term growth, both physical and cognitive.
Children who are breathing all this particulate matter as well as secondary smoke, and especially during this time when there is a change in season with the pollens and dust mites, all of this combines to cause lots of wheezing issues in children. So the kids with asthma that I follow are coming with more exacerbations. The kids who have viral infections get a more severe wheezing because of breathing the polluted air.
So, it's hit them really bad. So the number of patients that we are getting now because of respiratory infections, both in the OPD or in the emergency, there has been a 3 to 4-fold rise in their number of visits to the hospital. This is directly linked to the high levels of pollution that the city of Delhi and NCR is witnessing in the last 7 to 10 days.
The order to temporarily shut down power stations came from a panel of the Federal Environment Ministry, which also extended the closure of schools until further notice. The immediate impact of the pollution is clearly visible on the young infants and toddlers whose parents were rushing them to hospitals with complaints of wheezing, nose flowing, and other forms of allergies.
He was having a very cough throughout the night. He was having throughout the night and having a breathing. Yes, he was having breathing problem. He was having breathing problem, a lower breathing tract, something as disease. They said it's because of that. He can't sleep throughout the night. That is very serious.
Deadly pollution hits New Delhi every year as falling temperatures trap deadly pollutants from the power stations outside it, along with fumes and burning garbage. Levels surged to severe amounts this month, with New Delhi's air quality index, which measures fine particles that can get lodged in the lungs, reaching 499 on a scale of 500, indicating healthy people were also at risk of developing respiratory illnesses.
One is a fresh case of respiratory ailment where patient gives a history of exposure to prolonged, pollution exposure, and then followed by a sudden increase in breathlessness, chest tightness, and pain. And there is another subgroup which is a chronic lung patient, asthmatic patient, or a patient who has COPD, interstitial lung disease, or a post-COVID recovering patient. They are also coming in big numbers because of the pollution.
Contributors to the poor air quality in New Delhi, often ranked the world's most polluted capital, include coal-fired plants outside the city, as well as burning of garbage in the open. India's efforts to reduce the burning of crop waste, a major source of air pollution during winter, have had little benefit, despite its expenditure of billions of rupees over the past 4 years.
When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, Dubai Expo celebrates Children's Day 2021 with children encouraged to speak up and take action. Please stay with us. You're still watching Foreign Dispatches on Channels Television. To the COVID-19 pandemic, Austria has become the first European Union country to re-enter a full nationwide lockdown as coronavirus cases surge. The average daily number of deaths in the country has tripled in recent weeks.
In the Alpine city of Salzburg, the streets are empty once again as on Monday, Austria has begun its fourth national lockdown. is the first country in Western Europe to reimpose a drastic and unpopular measure this autumn in the face of surging coronavirus infections and struggling intensive care capacity. Announced last week, the lockdown means Austrians will only be allowed to leave their homes for a limited number of reasons. Hospitality and entertainment venues will close alongside all non-essential shops. Workplaces and schools will remain open, but parents have been asked to keep their children at home if possible. The measures will be in place for 10 days initially, but are expected to last for up to 20. In Vienna, locals describe how they feel about the change in restrictions.
I'm really fed up with these lockdowns. I've had enough. I don't know what else I can say. For my husband's business, for example, it's an absolute disaster. He works as a freelancer in tourism, and now they've closed everything again.
I think it's a pity we have another lockdown, but that's part of it. Infection numbers are rising, and I think that's a good solution. One day, it will all be over, and everything will be fine again.
From February the 1st, Austria will also make vaccination mandatory. It currently has one of the lowest rates in Western Europe, with only 2/3 of people double vaccinated. Over the week, protests erupted in the capital Vienna over the measures. Tens of thousands of people, many far-right supporters, took to the streets brandishing national flags and banners reading "Freedom."
Over in the Middle East, Israel has started administering the coronavirus vaccine to children aged 5 to 11. The country recently emerged from a fourth COVID-19 wave, and daily infections have been relatively low for the last few weeks. But the health ministry statistics show that a large share of the new infections have been in children and teenagers. Officials hope the new inoculation campaign will help bring down the numbers and perhaps stave off a new wave.
Israel began rolling out Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccination for 5 to 11-year-olds on Monday, November the 22nd, hoping to beat down the recent rise in coronavirus infections.
I came here to have my two youngest children vaccinated. I've already had my oldest children vaccinated. I think it's very important. I do believe in the vaccination. I think we need to think of the public in general.
We know that we need to do the vaccination in order to get to life. We were in a quarantine a lot of time, and the kids go to school. They're going with kids, and they're doing a lot of social activities. And we are very excited that we can vaccinate them and get to normal life.
A fourth wave of infection that hit Israel in June began subsiding in September. But over the past 2 weeks, the production rate of the virus that had remained below 1 for 2 months began climbing and has now crossed that threshold, indicating the virus could again be spreading exponentially. Daily cases have also crept up over the past few days, with half the confirmed infections presently among children aged between 11 and younger. Israel's 9.4 million population is relatively young, with around 1.2 million children in the 5 to 11 age group.
I brought my two daughters today for COVID-19 vaccination because I think it is an important step to give vaccination for children who didn't have coronavirus in their past. And it might save the life of those who are really vulnerable to the corona disease. So we are saving our lives and others' lives while getting the vaccination.
I was very excited that we now have the ability or the permission to give them vaccines, because we've had enough of this corona already, as far as we felt it in all aspects, in school and at home and at work and everything. And finally we're able to give them the vaccines and have them protected from this virus.
Israel's health ministry estimates that 1 in 3,500 children infected with coronavirus will later develop multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, in which parts of the body become inflamed, including the heart, lungs, kidneys, and brain. Officials have also noted the risk of lingering symptoms such as sleep disruptions, muscle pain, loss of smell and taste, headaches, and a cough, commonly known as long COVID. Israel has recorded 1.3 million total confirmed cases and more than 8,000 dead since the start of the pandemic. Around 57% of Israel's population is fully vaccinated, according to the Health Ministry, which means they have either received their third jab or it has not yet been 5 months since receiving their second.
And finally, child advocates and performers took over the biggest stage at the Expo 2020 to mark this year's Children's Day. Organized by UNICEF and the UAE Ministry of Community Development, the event is a call to both young and adult thought leaders to reimagine a better future for all, as well as mobilize collective action to make that vision a reality. Our correspondent, Mayowa Adegoke, brings us details of the celebration.
Happy Children's Day!
It's World Children's Day at the Expo, and children of all ages and races take center stage at the Al Wassil Dome, the heart of the Expo.
We are here to design with you the beautiful future of the world.
They may be innocent, but children are well aware of the world's problems and are now getting more vocal about the future they want for themselves.
I want more fun for the children across the world. I want them to not live in this coronavirus because masks for other kids are pretty annoying.
To live in peace with a clean planet, with no pollution, well, not as much anymore, and no conflicts between countries, and no discrimination anymore.
I feel so excited, and I also like it because it shows and spreads about the children's rights, because some people don't have it.
Today's event is championed by children as they inspire one another to speak up and take action. Tanzanian singer Abby Charms is the first solo performer at the event. Her special song, composed for the occasion, promotes a safer world and education for all children. Mental health as well as access to education are two issues that have come to the fore since the COVID-19 pandemic. UNICEF, in partnership with the UAE Ministry of Community Development, is seeking to promote a better future for every child.
The pandemic has made a lot of young people, just like you said, like not be able to socialize anymore, not be able to go to school. And a lot of young people looked forward to things like that, especially when they were having it rough, like they look forward to seeing their friends at school or like socializing with friends to kind of cope. So it's been really, really tough for people. But I think it's also been good because sometimes when you're so focused on like socializing, sometimes we forget ourselves and focusing on ourselves. I think the pandemic has allowed people to do a lot of self-reflection, to understand their own emotional intelligence and things like that. So it has been negative, but I'm sure that it's also been very positive for a lot of other young people as well.
Highlighting children in the Middle East, members of the UAE Youth Paralympic team, as well as young Emirati poet Mazna Al-Ameri also take to the stage.
It's a horrendous situation for many, many children, in fact 38 million children who live in conflict zones, who need humanitarian assistance. Their future is really hanging. It's time for wars to stop. It's time for conflict to come to an end.
The event closes on a high note with celebrated Lebanese singer and UNICEF Regional Ambassador Yara.
Well, this is where we say goodbye till next time. But remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. Stay safe.